Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Doc Nelly. So we are the group 4 that will be discussing some of the sub-tests under assessment in education from our book, Diagnostic Tests and Psychoeducational Test Batteries. Next slide, please. So now we will start. I am Christine Ivy Ovas, who will be discussing diagnostic tests and reading tests. Next slide, please. So we'll have to start for a short history that in 20th century, it was recognized that tests of intelligence could be used to do more than simply measure cognitive ability. In what I understand on this is that tests of intelligence could be used to do can be measured and improve beyond cognitive abilities of the people, but also to their reading comprehension skills. That is fit from the concept of Binet and Simon about mental orthopedics, whereby intelligence test data could be used to improve learning. Next slide, please. So, in Chapter 10 Assessment Education of our book, found on page 344, it operationally defined there that diagnostic test is a piece of evaluative information, which has evaluative purposes that typically applied to test data that are used to make judgments, such as pass or fail and admit or reject decisions. It is also a piece of diagnostic information used in educational setting or purposes that typically apply to tests or test data to pinpoint a student's difficulty and is usually for remedial purposes, which made us say that they're both evaluative and diagnostic. A diagnostic test is a tool that has evaluative information to identify areas of deficit to be targeted for intervention. Next slide, please. So, aside from its meaning and definition, there's also beneficial to it to students or to other people. You see, diagnostic tests are used to get prior knowledge on students, and that teachers will have to plan future instructions for them. It is also a test that is not graded, but it also helps teachers in schools or universities to identify the student gaps that they're going to have to deal with to help guide their future instruction. So, teachers will have to utilize these diagnostic assessments in the classroom, and they give this before starting a course or unit. And just like what I said earlier, that this diagnostic test is not graded or not for grading purposes. But teachers will still have to try to get accurate results because some students don't take seriously in answering a diagnostic test just because they just heard that it's not for grading purposes. But still some of them are in serious of answering diagnostic tests. And an example of a diagnostic test that I have in mind is a textbook pre-course test. That's one way to put it. Next slide, please. So, of what you see right now is an illustration example of Woodcock reading mastery tests revised. Why does it say revised? Because it already has first and second edition, and this one that I put it in the illustration is a third edition, and inside of it are old are subtests from the first and second edition and three new subtests in this revised test that I will explain further. Next slide, please. So that was an example of reading tests. Yes. So it is useful. This reading test is useful to students because it helps the teachers to understand the students' overall reading abilities. So, furthermore, for the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test revise, it is to measure of reading readiness, reading achievement, and reading difficulties in each of the subtests. And the people that are about to use this or to take are children that are 4.5 years old and adults that are 80 years old and mostly in between. And they'll have to take 15 and 45 minutes on the test. So the coverage of this test is associated with subtests that students will have to take. And there are 5 subtests, and these are letter identification, word identification, word attack, word comprehension, and lastly, passage comprehension. Next slide, please. So to further explain about the subtests, I'll just have to show you an example. This is an example of letter identification. Uh, Items on this measure the ability to name letters presented in different forms, either cursive or printed, as well as uppercase and lowercase letters. So students that are using this are kindergartens, graders, and as for adults like us, we are so getting used and very fond of word puzzles in book that is printed or in technology that is wordscapes. We find letters that will have to that can be a word. Yes. Next slide, please. So for the next slide is word identification. This is an example of it. Words that are arranged in order to increase the difficulty to students and they're asked to read each word aloud. Most of them are kindergartens using this kind of identification word and that are starting to learn how to read, and that's how way to put it. So beside of it is an example of word comprehension. Items that assess word meaning by using a 4-part analogy format. So students on this part of test, they'll have to, this actually improves their analyzation skills in reading. They'll have to analyze on this part. Next slide, please. So this is an example of passage comprehension. Students must supply the missing word in order to complete a sentence. It can be done either in phrases, sentences, or short paragraphs. And beside it is the fifth and last subtest of Woodcock Mastery test, which is word attack. In this test, students are asked to pronounce each nonsense syllable that incorporates phonetic as well as structural analysis skills. Next slide, please. And this is the last one of the subtests that are new in third edition. These are 3 added subtests are phonological awareness, listening comprehension, and oral reading fluency. All of these reading tests determine if students are prepared for further learning and educational advancement. Next slide, please. So that's all for my explanation for the diagnostic test and reading test. And now I will be leaving the floor to Miss Cobrado. Thank you.
Okay, so math tests are tests that help diagnose students' difficulties with arithmetic and mathematical concepts and can provide a profile of their mathematical strengths and weaknesses. Two examples of this type of test are Stanford Diagnostic Mathematics Test, 4th edition, and KEMA 3 Diagnostic System. These tests typically test everything from basic concepts and operations to applications that need advanced problem-solving skills. So first, let's talk about Stanford Diagnostic Mathematics Test, 4th edition. So it is a standardized test. It measures mathematical proficiency in the basic concepts and skills for students that are just entering school or just entering college, while emphasizing problem-solving concepts and strategies. The test identifies specific areas of difficulty for each student in grades 2 through 12 so that teachers can plan appropriate intervention. It can be administered individually or with a group. It contains multiple choice and optional free response items. So free response items are designed to provide the examiner with understanding on how the test taker was able to solve the different kinds of problems, to know the reasoning, methods, and strategies that they used. Next one is KEMA 3 Diagnostic System or Assessment. It is an individually administered test that measures essential mathematical concepts and skills. It covers the complete range of math concepts and skills, from early experiences with rote and rational counting through experiences with factoring polynomials and solving linear equations. It can be used with children age 4.5 to adults as old as 21 years of age. The test comes in two forms, each containing 10 subsets, which contain 372 full-color test items that represent three general math content areas: basic concepts, operations, and applications. 8 subtests are administered with a flip easel, and 2 subtests are administered with a written computation examinee booklet. So for the next one, psychoeducational test batteries. So psychoeducational test batteries are test kits that generally contain two types of tests: those that measure abilities related to academic success, and those that measure educational achievement in areas such as reading and arithmetic. They are designed to give an assessment on an individual's strengths and weaknesses across a broad range of skills and abilities. Unlike diagnostic testing, which is used to assess mastery of specific goals and specific areas of weaknesses, psychoeducational test batteries are more general in focus, testing a wide array of skills in a particular domain. So it generally contains two types of tests: those that measure academic success of students and those that measure educational success in areas such as reading and arithmetic. And this allows a comparison of student performance with other students and evaluates the strengths and weaknesses, which enables the teacher to plan effective interventions. And so, for this topic, let's begin by discussing what psychoeducational battery, the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children, and its revised second edition as presented by Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Developed by a husband and wife team of psychologists, the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children, or the KABC, was designed for the use with test takers from age 2.5 through age 12.5. Subtests measuring both intelligence and achievement are included. The KABC intelligence subtests are divided into two groups, namely simultaneous skills and sequential skills, reflecting the two kinds of information processing skills identified by Luria and his students. Next, please. Factor analytics studies of the KABC have confirmed the presence of a factor researchers labeled simultaneous processing and a factor labeled sequential processing. It is an achievement factor that researchers have had difficulty finding. Kaufman found evidence for the presence of an achievement factor, but independent researchers have different ideas about what that third factor is. For example, Good and Lane identified the third factor as verbal comprehension and reading achievement, Kaufman and McLean as achievement and reading ability, and Keith and Novak as reading achievement and verbal reasoning. Whatever the factor is, the KABC achievement scale has been shown to predict achievement. In addition to questions about what the elusive third factor actually measures, questions have also been raised about whether or not sequential and simultaneous learning are entirely independent. Next slide, please. In the next generation of the KABC, the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children second edition, there are changes in the age range covered, the structure of the test, and even the conceptual underpinnings of the test. The age range for the second edition of the test was extended upward, ages 3 to 18, in order to expand the possibility of making ability and achievement comparisons with the same test through high school. Structurally, 10 new subtests were created, 8 of the existing subtests were removed, and only 8 of the original subtests remained. Conceptually, the grouping of the KABC in Luria's theory of sequential versus simultaneous processing theory was expanded. In addition, a grouping in the Cattell-Horn-Carroll theory was added. Next, please. In general, reviewers of the KABC second edition found it to be a psychometrically sound instrument for measuring cognitive abilities. However, few evidenced ease with its new dual theoretical basis. For example, a reviewer wondered aloud about assessing two distinct sets of processes and abilities without adequately explaining, saying how a single test can measure two distinct constructs. And some reviewers raised questions about the variable that were actually being measured by the KABC second edition. For example, a reviewer questioned the extent to which certain supplemental tests could best be conceived as measures of specific abilities or measures of multiple abilities. In general, however, reviewers were satisfied that for school-age children, the KABC second edition is closely aligned with the 5 CHC broad abilities it is extended to measure. Other researchers have confirmed that the KABC second edition is indeed tapping the broad CHC abilities. That was all for me and will be continued by Mr. Manuel.
The Woodcock-Johnson 4, or WJ4. Compared to WJ3, where it has two connorm abilities, the test of achievement and test of cognitive abilities, Woodcock-Johnson 4 has a third connorm batteries where it combines the test of achievement and test of cognitive abilities to measure oral language ability. Test of achievement is an individually administered norm reference instrument that is useful for screening, diagnosing, and monitoring progress in reading, writing, and mathematics. Test of cognitive abilities is a comprehensive series of exams designed to measure general intellectual ability as well as academic achievement, scholastic aptitude, cognitive abilities, and oral language. Next slide. The test of oral language ability. It targets listening comprehension and lexical access. A total of 12 tests, 9 in English and 3 similar tests, but in Spanish. It is used to gauge proficiency in English or Spanish to assess the assessee's performance in reading, writing, and related tasks. The Woodcock-Johnson 4 manual states that the battery may be used with people as young as 2 years old and as old as 90 years old or older. In relating to Cattell-Horn-Carroll CHC theory of cognitive abilities, Woodcock-Johnson 4 yields a multitude of measures including general intellectual ability, fluid abilities, and crystallized abilities, and a combination of the two. Next. Other tools of assessment in educational setting. Performance assessment. It is referred to any type of assessment that requires to do more than just choosing the correct response from a small group of alternatives. Example yan is yung mga tests, yung mga standardized tests or yung finals exam. An evaluation of performance tasks is according to criteria developed by experts from the domain of study tapped by those tasks. Next slide. Here is an example of performance tasks. Next slide. Performance tasks are work sample designed to elicit representative knowledge, skills, and values from a particular domain of study. Yung example earlier, it shows it represents the knowledge, skills, and values from the particular study of art. Basically, yun yung performance task niya outside a standardized test or final exam. Next. Portfolio assessment. It refers to the evaluation of one's work samples or portfolio. Work samples refers to drawings, maps, artworks, articles they wrote, blogs, etc. Compared to performance assessment, portfolio assessment is the evaluation of performance tasks, compilation of performance tasks. Sa performance assessment, individually ini-evaluate yung work mo. Sa portfolio assessment, i-evaluate yung compilation ng works mo. Basically, yun yung in other words. Next. Authentic assessment is an evaluation of relevant, meaningful tasks that may be conducted to evaluate learning of academic subjects matter, but that demonstrates a student's transfer that study to real-world activities. An example nito sa next slide. Example is doing a research, thesis, or debates, where you use your knowledge and skills. Use your knowledge or skills in real world. And sa debate, yung knowledge mo, you try to express it to other people. Next. Next slide, please. Peer appraisal techniques. This is a technique employed to obtain information about an individual through the individual's peer groups. Basically, ito yung pag-evaluate mo sa individual based sa comments ng peers niya. That can be your friends, the family, yung guardian, etc. Nominating is a method of peer appraisal in which individuals are asked to select or nominate other individuals for various types of activities. Example nito is a classroom class election. You see individuals nominate their friends or people na alam nilang may ability to be a leader. That's nominating, a peer appraisal technique. Next. Sociogram is a method of organizing peer appraisal results in illustrated form. For example, you can see here Sam is nominating Jill and Beth and so on and so forth. So basically dito ipakita kung saan yung peers ng individual and paano sila nominate each other. That is all for this presentation. Thank you.